Welcome to the Desert Living Podcast, where we discuss ways to make living in the desert better, from professionals that can cut your costs to experts in all aspects of desert living. I am Rob Madden, Phoenix's green home broker and the designated broker with Green Leaf Realty in Phoenix, Arizona, in the heart of the Sonoran Desert. This is episode 101, and in this episode, we interviewed Greg Field, owner of PGT Solar, a direct SunPower solar dealer here in the Phoenix area. As always, all of our podcast recordings can be found online at phoenixecobroker.com. Here's our interview with Greg. This is Rob Madden with Green Leaf Realty, and today I am talking with Greg Field, who is the owner of SunPower by PGT Solar Solutions, and today we're going to talk solar and solar here in the Phoenix area. Greg, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Rob. Appreciate the time.
So I know for a lot of people, we live in the Valley of the Sun, 308 days of sun out in the city there. And tell me a little bit about your company, what you do, and what makes you different than the 3,000 other solar people that we see out in the Valley.
Well, number one, SunPower is the maker of the most efficient, highest wattage solar panels in the market today. It's a premium product. It's always been a premium product. It's got patented design that is really designed for desert heat. The wiring, instead of the wiring being on the front of the cell, like most manufacturing, it's on the back of the cell. That gives the cell the ability to flex in temperature without breaking. Super important in Arizona because heat is what cracks solar panels and cells. Really, it's the cells that crack. So that technology has been out there. It's a premium product. The model that we've worked with SunPower in general has been selling through third party. So it's been a dealership model that you could buy SunPower through here in Arizona. And I worked with a dealer here for about 8 years. Challenge with that model is you have to pay a premium for that installation because you're paying a third party to install SunPower. And the average markup for an installing dealer can be anywhere from 10, 15, 20% more cost for a homeowner to get into a product like SunPower. So my dealership's a little different. It's what's called a non-installing dealership. Idea there is SunPower does all the installation for the client, project management, construction management is all done in-house through SunPower, and effectively allows me to bring a manufacturer direct solar solution to my client, cutting down margin and allowing a client to get a much better quality solar product on their roof without having to overspend.
So when you say you're cutting down margin, are we talking a couple of dollars, or what's the significant impact of cutting down the margin?
So in solar, we price on a per watt basis. So it's not on equipment per se, it's on a wattage basis. On average, comparatively, my dealership is able to offer SunPower, a few $1,000s, depending on how big of the system. But generally, a couple $1,000s in margin difference if you were to buy that through an installing dealership versus myself and through SunPower on a non-installing basis. Actually, I don't know if the value for me and the client side is not necessarily just trying to get the best price for SunPower. I think the larger issue that I've seen, and I've seen it on my own house, is the quality control that you get with a manufacturer installing the product they build versus hiring a third party who's installing someone else's product.
Got it.
That's kind of some of the value I see in addition to saving some money.
Now, one of the things you mentioned, which I think some consumers out there may not understand, is you talked about high efficiency.
Yeah.
When you're talking different solar panels, you talked about the construction quality of the build, which you said makes a huge difference here in the heat that we have, especially in the summertime. But efficiency, what is the importance of efficiency with solar panels?
So efficiency is basically a simple measure. In layman's terms, it's essentially how much square foot or roof you need per watt produced. So the more efficient the panel, the less roof you need. Major advantage there is if you have a house, for example, that has, let's say, a smaller roof section available for south exposure or west exposure or a combination of the two. With SunPower, you could get more power per square foot of that roof and actually get a larger system even with the smaller roof footprint. So effectively just means in SunPower, you're going to use less panels and less roof, and that allows the design to be a little more effective in regards to shading and where the best areas of roof are being used. because SunPower is using less roof, we can target the best parts of your roof.
So I know some of the complaints I hear about solar is they're unsightly. So if you're dealing with a smaller system, are you saying that it doesn't have to be as unsightly on the roof for some people? Or
in some cases, depending on how your lot and your roof direction, how that shapes east, west, south. So depending on your lot, SunPower could be minimized for the visual, if you will, the aesthetic of the product. That could be minimized by pushing back, since it is a smaller footprint. For example, if we had a west-southwest roof, we pushed it back further on the roof, you wouldn't see it from the street as readily. And because we're using less panels and less square foot, we can usually do a better job of hiding it if that's a major concern for a client.
So who is a good candidate for solar?
Really, it's hard. It's a hard question to answer. So a number of factors enter my mind. Number one, if you're SRP, unfortunately right now, it's really not a great value to get into solar. SRP introduced a demand charge if you do solar. Essentially,
explain a demand charge for those that don't understand it.
Yeah, and so it's basically SRP takes your highest peak hour consumption charge for the month, and then uses that as a multiplier on this extra fee they charge you. And they're doing that as basically a way to dampen the amount of solar that's going into SRP. So that's basically a punitive charge if you do solar.
Okay.
And that charge can get fairly pricey in the summer, because if you're not controlling your peak usage or really have your eyes on how much usage you have during peak, that fee can become pretty large pretty quickly. So SRP is really not a great utility for solar right now. I really don't even, when I talk to clients that have SRP, I'll generally discourage them from pursuing solar. APS is a better utility for solar, although they're more expensive on rates for retail clients. From a solar perspective, they give a better value. They pay currently roughly about 10.5 cents for every hour you send back. So they buy the power. So they switched from what was called net metering about a year and a half ago in 2017. So before, when you had solar, you would send the hour to the utility, you would get the hour back on a 1-for-1 trade. That was called net metering. They've now switched to net billing with APS. And essentially now APS, instead of doing an hour for hour, 1-for-1, they allow you to sell the power back, the excess solar power, and they buy that back at 10.5 cents per kilowatt hour you send them. And then that adds up into a monthly credit that you can then use to offset billing. So if you have APS and you have maybe a good south or west exposure, there's definitely really good possibilities for solar. If you only have an east exposure, it's not really great for net billing because you're producing your power in the morning, which doesn't really do much for offsetting your peak power, which is 3 to 8.
And you're talking about the people that are on the on-peak, off-peak kind of billing.
And virtually everyone on APS at this point is going to be on some form of what's called saver choice, which is 3 to 8 for peak hours. And that's going to be that's why we look now in solar more for western exposure roofs. So anywhere between south to west are good roof planes to work with solar right now.
Are you seeing people out there nowadays putting on that 20 kilowatt system on the roof to offset 100% and then some? Or are they just trying to offset more of the on-peak usage?
I would say it's rare that clients go after just on-peak. If people do solar in general, they want to go after most, if not all, the billing.
Okay.
And usually it's going to come down to if the solar design doesn't get to 100% offset, that's where clients become a little less excited to go solar. So I just think the psychology of the client is if I'm going to do this, I want to get most, if not all, my billing, reduced or eliminated.
Are those people successful in getting that bill offset 100%? Or
it's really has a lot to do with roof direction. So the more you have exposure to southwest and west to get afternoon production with your solar, that's going to go a long way to making those credits stretch out and be able to cover your peak charges during summer.
Okay.
If you don't have that exposure, then you're going to get more exposure to peak. So if you think about peak rate, it's 24 cents right now per kilowatt hour, and your power from solar is being bought at 10.5 cents. So you're basically getting a little less than half the value to trade the power back to utility. So that's why it's really important what time of day you produce power, not just how much power you produce from solar.
Now, one of the things that you and I have talked about in the past before are some of the steps that people can take before getting solar.
Yes.
It seems like a lot of people will just jump into the solar arena hoping to offset power without thinking about, well, maybe I could reduce my demand prior to installing a solar system. What are some of the things that you recommend to clients to help offset or help reduce their peak demand prior to going solar?
First recommendation would be to participate in the SRP APS $99 energy audit program. That's a full, comprehensive 2-hour plus, investigation of your house. It's a blower door test, potentially some thermal imaging. Get your data in terms of what your house needs, so you have an efficiency plan instead of just going out and hiring contractors and guessing that I need insulation or I need duct sealing. Find out if you need those things first, and then work within that program. There's some great contractors that are experts at fixing attics. I work with Green ID. It's a separate company David Burns owns here in Tempe. They do a lot of that efficiency work for clients that I have that want to do solar, but also want to look at reducing, and getting their home envelope a little tighter before they add the solar. Great combination step. If you can do efficiency and solar, you can sometimes reduce your system size with solar if your envelope does better and you're more efficient, you're not using as much power. It can be a nice combination to reduce your system size. It really comes down to budget. So what I have found, since I work in both efficiency and solar, I try not to clutter and give too much information at one meeting. So generally I'll try to give a client more of a step-by-step plan on, maybe efficiency if they want to do that as a first step, if that's what their budget allows, and then solar as a finishing step. But to your point earlier, the last thing you want to do is use solar as a Band-Aid and just try to put a whole bunch of panels up there on an inefficient house and expect that that's going to have a good result for you.
Now, over the last 5 years, we have seen the rise of loans. We still see a surge of people going out with solar leases out there. Can you talk a little bit about what are some of the different products that people, what are the different options they have for financing, whether it's a loan or a lease? For a lot of people, coming up with $15,000, $20,000 out of pocket, it's not really an option.
Yeah.
But definitely with the advent of the loans and the leases out there, we've definitely seen some more products out there. What are you seeing out there in the solar marketplace?
So solar lease was extremely popular 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago. That's really all I worked with primarily. It was the only way to get into solar with no cost. And you didn't have to use the tax credit because the tax credit would go back to the lease company. You still see some leases. They're still very popular in retirement areas where you have retirees that don't have any appetite for a tax credit. They have no use for a tax credit. So leasing is still the primary vehicle in retirement areas. Loan has really taken over the market. I'd say in the last 2 years, lending and loans have become probably 60 to 70% of our market at this point. So people like the idea of taking advantage of solar without having to front the tax credit money. The loans that are out there now are 18-month paybacks, meaning you have 18 months to claim and use the tax credit and then repay the lender. So essentially, instead of borrowing, today's tax credit is 26%, it used to be 30%, but the loan is calculated with the 26% credit as if you paid that up front, which gets your monthly to start out at a lower payment. And that payment is definitely lower than a lease for the same system today. So you're cash positive generally against what you're paying the utility for the same energy. And then you get 18 months with no additional charge to pay back the tax credit. That's the primary mover in our market right now is loan. Those loans have become very consumer friendly, and you see a lot of lenders out there now. There's like 4 or 5 major renewable lenders out there now. So that you've seen a lot more development in loan, and the loans have just gotten better and better. Interest rates have come down. It's just made the product really attractive if you can use a tax credit.
Well, one of the things that we saw back when loans first hit the marketplace, you had stellar credit, rates were higher.
Right.
Have those qualifying criteria that loans have they eased a little bit
Yes.
at all, or is it easier for people now to go with a loan?
Yeah, in fact, generally the minimum threshold for today's lender is about a 650 FICO. And they use different credit bureaus, but 650, and then there are a couple lenders that I'd probably stay away from if you're lower than a 650 because they're going to take advantage of you on the financing side. But generally your threshold is 650, and if you have that, and that wasn't true a few years ago. But even a few years ago, we were looking at a 680 minimum score for a lease, and loans were slightly higher than that. So lending has definitely gotten a lot more attractive on the the barriers to entry are not there the way they were a few years ago.
Now, you mentioned earlier with leases, there's no money out of pocket. Literally zero, signed here on the dotted line, make a monthly payment. no money out of pocket. Are we seeing that same type of structure with loans where somebody can come in, no money out of pocket?
Yes, that's how they're all structured.
Okay.
The basic structure is you don't come out of pocket for an upfront. You do make a monthly, but the payment is structured for the first 18 months as if you paid back that tax credit. So it starts out at a lower payment. And then by the 18th month, the lender will do a one-time reamortization on that loan, and they'll ask you to pay back the federal tax credit, not the state, which is $1,000. You get to keep that. But the federal needs to go back. If you don't pay back the full federal tax credit within 18 months, your loan will be reamortized, and then your monthly will go up. If you pay back the tax credit, it'll stay right where it's been for the first 18. If you pay back more than the tax credit, then your actually monthly will go down.
Okay.
So they're very friendly that way, but and I just try to explain to clients, if you're going to do a solar loan, you really want to sit down with an accountant and find out and make sure you can use a tax credit, because it's not an automatic credit. It's basically a credit against what you owe in taxes. So you have to have that liability exposure, meaning you have to owe it in taxes. And I find a lot of W-2 employees do not have that because they're having taxes withdrawn, but at the end of the year they don't owe, so they really have no value. They have no real use for a tax credit.
What now, looking forward into the future here, what are some of the trends that you're seeing with solar? What are some of the things that you're looking forward to? What are maybe some of the legislative differences we're going to see in regulation, in products, in services you have to offer? What are some of the changes?
I see two major developments coming. The first one is going to be battery storage. Cost and scale. We're going to see California's market is driving that pretty hard right now with the mandatory blackouts for fires. So we're seeing a whole bunch of battery going in, record amounts of batteries going into California. That's going to drive cost and innovation and improve the cost of batteries, the technology of the battery. I think in 3 to 5 years, you're going to see batteries in Arizona as a pretty common piece with the solar system, and it'll be integrated with the install, where that's really less common right now because of the cost barrier you have with batteries. I usually recommend to clients on batteries hold off for at least a few years for that reason. Electric cars are also going to push that market. So the amount of electric cars out there, you're going to see a lot more in the next few years. Economies of scale from the electric car market is going to also drive down battery costs, and solar will be one of the beneficiaries for that. And then legislatively, I think the main thing I'm looking for, so the tax credit as of now is slowly dropping. So last year was 30% federal, now it's 26%. Next year it goes to 22%, and then it's supposed to go to zero. My suspicion is, depending on what happens with the election, is that we will get an extension of that tax credit as just a minimum baseline, and it'll probably go back to 30% if I were guessing. But I think long term, I think at some point, a future administration is going to get after a carbon tax. And that's where I think you're going to see solar homeowners perhaps getting together as a co-op and selling their renewable energy credits to industries that would otherwise pay fines for dirty pollution, for how they manufacture and things like that. I think that market's going to become, the rec market has become a realistic thing for even local solar homeowners like myself. I think there'll be a value to selling your recs on an annual basis. And that's kind of, I see as a more sustainable way for solar versus just relying on a federal tax credit.
Do you see any changes in products at all, in efficiencies of solar panels, in the type of technology behind the solar panels, whether it's the panels, the inverters,
We've seen that there's been a pretty seismic shift in the last couple years, moving from standard string inverters, the centralized inverter that sits on the wall, takes all the power from the panels, does that inversion, if you will, from DC to AC. That's now done, for the most part. SunPower has certainly switched to a microinverter where every panel is built with an inverter, which is nice because now you don't have a central failure point where the whole system shuts off. Each panel has its own power independent of the other panels. So if one panel fails, it doesn't shut off the string like it would on a string inverter. So that's already been an advancement we've already seen. I think inverters will, primarily the market's going to move completely to microinverters in the next few years. I think string inverters will be kind of a thing of the past in a few years. I think thin film technology will get better and more efficient. That's kind of the
And when you
knock.
say thin film, are we talking about the Tesla solar tiles that go on
Yeah,
the
that's
roof
that's
type
a-
technology, or
that's a
are we talking about
version.
the windows that are supposed to be?
Those are all like kind of nano solar technology,
Okay.
and thin film's kind of probably in that same boat. The knock on thin film is it takes a lot of square foot to produce the same wattage you can get today with what we have in mono and polycrystalline panels. I think you're going to see in the next few years thin film will get more efficient. Right now, it's really only viable for commercial roofs because you need a lot of space. But I think that technology eventually will move into more of that nano spray-on application. It'll be a low yield product, but I think you'll probably start seeing builders start to adopt homes that actually can produce some of their own power without necessarily having to have a roof integration of solar photovoltaic panels.
Well, Greg, we're kind of running out of time here, but I sure appreciate you sitting down with me today and talking about solar here in the Phoenix area. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, how can they reach you?
Best way is just usually reach out to my cell phone, which is 602-363-7327. You can always go on my website. It's phoenixgreenteam.com. And you can visit my website. It's got a lot of resources there for people that want to do more research. But yeah, generally cell phone or website is probably the best ways.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the show, and good luck out there in the solar world.
Thanks so much, Rob. Appreciate it.
Have a great day.
You too.
You have just listened to our latest Desert Living podcast. I am your host, Rob Madden of Green Leaf Realty and Phoenix's Green Home Broker. You can find out more information about this topic and other desert living topics online at our website at www.phoenixecobroker.com, or feel free to give me a call at any time. I can be reached directly at 480-888-1234. And again, that number is 480-888-1234. Have a great week and enjoy this week in the desert.